Well, hello everyone. Alex Tulio here, CEO of Financially Executive Women. Now, you might notice for our regular listeners that my normal co-host is not here today, the wonderful Mick Philippo, and instead, I hate to say, it could be even better co-host today. I've got a wingwoman today in Jen, who's the head of marketing and communications for Sandstone Technology, because Mick couldn't join us, Jen, but I say all the more fun for us. Great to be here with you, hosting another fabulous episode of A Digital First, A Banking Transformation. You know I get excited, so I think between us we're going to wave our arms around a lot. I'm going to let you do the honours today, and hello to your pooch in the background. Inevitable, right? The dog's going to... So we're embracing it. As everyone knows now, 15 months of shows, we're kind of just rolling with it. So, Jen, I'm going to give you the honour of introducing our guest today, Shane Rigby, who's the CEO of LIXI.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, I believe that my dogs will be forming part of today's session. It is a pleasure sitting in for Mick today. And it also gives me an even better pleasure to introduce our guest, Shane Rigby, who is the CEO of LIXI and has demonstrated a passion for delivering business value through the use of technology. Shane is particularly interested in how using technology to drive continual improvement can solve business problems in exciting and often unexpected ways. Shane drives innovation and efficiencies in the lending industry by leading a globally unique data standards body. His background in banking and technology has framed his vision for LIXI's future. Shane has held a series of financial services and banking technology roles in the UK, Singapore, USA, and Australia. He is a strong technology leader, having proved himself as a business analyst and developer before successfully leading program delivery across multiple areas in a global bank. He has strong experience in understanding how teams interact with the technologies they use and driving better productivity with the careful application of technology solutions. So without further ado, I would like to welcome you, Shane, to today's session. All I can say is you have such an impressive background. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
So, Shane, we did warn you, everyone who tunes in, and I should say welcome to everyone from around the world, because I know that you're tuning in from all parts of the globe, which is fantastic, and we still get a real kick out of all our regular listeners and our new community as well. So, Shane, we were asking you some really tough questions behind the scenes, not really, but we were saying that, it's so funny, without fail, every one of our guests hears their bio read out and is like, oh, God, that feels really weird.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's just this funny thing, right? But yours is nice and snappy, and there's heaps you want to dive into. But give us a bit of the Shane Rigby story in your own words. Is this what you dreamed of doing when you were a little boy? Like, what was the journey to here?
Oh no! From when I was a little kid, I was always interested in money. Actually, I remember getting a kid's book at about 5, how to make and manage money. So I was making candles and selling things along the street at home, lemonade stands, squeezing orange juice. And then the funny thing was I ended up, when it came to choosing a degree, my parents were really surprised I ended up doing chemical engineering. So they were sure I'd do something in finance or business. I ended up doing chemical engineering, but found my way back into it in the long run.
So give us a bit more. And so I love in the first 2 minutes, we've already got something I was not expecting to hear about, as a 5-year-old, you already had your lemonade stand. But I love this, and Jen knows as well. We talk about technology and digital transformation on this show, and inevitably we talk probably more about humans and the human journey, right? And for a lot of those listening, I know you're always fascinated to hear about these stories, because it sounds to me, Shane, that yours wasn't a linear, right, I want to do this and then do this at uni and then done this, for a career, right? Like, I know you had lots of interesting sidebars along the way. So give us a bit of a feel for, because you've worked overseas and you've done heaps of stuff. So give us a bit of a feel from where did you go from chemical engineering that got you back into this industry, into LIXI?
Yeah, I think one of my earliest exposures to using IT in a business context was as a chemical engineer in the very early days of Excel, using Excel to try and do some modelling of the way pumps perform under different conditions. And I found that I was using so much data that the tool wasn't capable of dealing with it as well as I would have liked. So I finished my chemical engineering, ended up doing a PhD in chemical engineering, looking at interesting things like the kinetics of diamond formation, industrial diamonds, etc. And then when I came to working as a chemical engineer in real life, again, I came back to the problem that dealing with data was my bugbear, and solving the data problem was more interesting than solving the engineering problem. So I ended up then reverting back and got into the IT side of the work that I was doing, and ended up becoming a developer, and then that sort of set off the path that I've been on since.
Well, I was going to say, just then you touched on the fact that you're using Excel. Excel didn't quite cut it in terms of what you were trying to achieve, but that it was the data that was the intriguing part. Now, obviously, LIXI is our data standards body for lending in Australia. So, with what you do now on a daily basis, what are you seeing? Like, COVID has obviously made a significant impact on the industry over the last 12 months, and data standards have, clearly been front and center of that. So what have you actually seen that has taken place within that component of the industry over the last 12 months, and where do you see it heading?
Yeah, so I guess LIXI's got a few interfaces to the organisations that we deal with. Firstly, we get change requests coming through, so people would like a change made to the standard to incorporate something new. Trivial ones, or not trivial, but small ones like enabling non-binary as a gender is something that has to come through a change request, or MX as a name title instead of Mr., Mrs., Ms. Those kind of things come through change requests, and they get very technical as well, talking about how to represent the rounding on the final payments of a 360 monthly period mortgage payment. So a whole range of those things. So we see those change requests come through. But I think the more interesting involvement I have with those organisations is looking at how they develop software, how they deploy software, how they implement change. And it really starts to come into this idea of transformation. How do they become good at executing change? Because inevitably, working around a standard means you're deploying software, delivering software, implementing software, and trying to use that software in an organisation that encompasses not just software, but it's people's processes, tools. So I see a lot about the efforts towards transformation. And obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of excitement, particularly in the trade media, about how COVID's driven technical or digital transformation to a huge extent. And my take on that's quite different to some others, I think. I think there's been much less true digital transformation. There's been the implementation of some digital features, which makes the customer journey seem more digital, but under the hood, there's a lot of very mechanical things going on that involve Excel and humans and lots of manual processes that provides a huge opportunity for LIXI, I think, going forwards.
Where do you see, I find this fascinating, Shane, because, look, as we've probably already talked about, once we start to get underneath, and my words, not yours, but, this veneer, right, of transformation, and we said, because we focus on, kind of the sexy, interesting features at the front and the glossiness, but underneath. And I think this is why, with previous episodes, Mick and I have talked to lots of leaders who are in big organisations where you think, gosh, are they ever going to be able to actually re-engineer what's underneath, because you've got legacy systems and you've got Excel and you've got human beings and you've got all these embedded, it's so complex. And of course, this is why I think we always come back to, yes, there's transformation, but underneath that, what is it? You've had a lot of experience and a lot of exposure to digital transformation. I think you were sharing just before we went on air, a stat, I think something like 70% digital transformations fail. There's loads of research and examples. No, I don't want to ask what the answer is, but I'd love your perspective on how do we do that better? How do we really solve for these sort of transformations in a different way? Love your thoughts on, I know that's big, but It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is understanding what you believe digital transformation to mean. So I think I see it a little bit differently to many, in that being digitally transformed means that I am good at executing change through digital means on a daily basis. So whatever I did yesterday, last week, last year, isn't going to cut it tomorrow, next week, next year. I've got to improve the way I do things regularly. And given that software and IT is such a huge percentage of a bank's spend, focusing just on the features and the way operations works around the software I think is short-sighted. What we're really trying to do in a digital transformation is tool up the organisation to be able to execute change quickly, regularly, and reliably. If you can do that, the features will just come. It's a little bit like, I like the analogy of using a sprinter. So if you look at a sprinter crossing the line in sub 10 seconds, if you're just looking at the act of them crossing the line in sub 10 seconds and think, I'd like to do that, I'd like to get really good at crossing the line in sub 10 seconds, it's really easy to overlook all of the time that they spend in the gym, working on their fast twitch muscle fibers, working on their reaction time so they get off the blocks quickly, working on their technique to get your knees up high, right angle of the body, all of those things. It's not just about crossing the line, it's about getting everything right under the hood so that you can cross the line quickly. In a similar way, digital transformation is about making sure that you can execute the change that's required tomorrow, because the one thing we know is that whatever we're doing today will require change tomorrow, because things around us are changing very quickly.
Yeah. So do you, touching on the statistic that, we were talking about before, where you were saying that, 70% of all digital transformations fail, what do you put that down to? Or is it a combination of things that actually, attribute to that failure?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. Obviously, if you look at any of the big organisations that make a lot of money from digital transformations, the big consulting organisations, they tend to, it's a very top-down approach, but the top-down approach needs to engage at the detail level. So again, people, processes, tools. It's very difficult to overlay an enormous digitally transformed map on an existing organisation where you've got legacy data, tools, processes. It's incredibly complicated. So if you think of it as a single big effort to become digitally transformed, I think it's destined to struggle. If you can get into the psyche of the people at the coalface that are working on a daily basis, a digital transformation is about tooling them up to be able to say, hey, I think I could do this in a better way. Can we, as a team, software developers, business analysts, architects, enterprise architects, can we realign everything that we're doing so that I can make this a little bit more efficient? And it can't be a year-long project. It's got to be every day looking at what you do and just improving it a little bit. And for me, doing that around the technology is what digital transformation is.
I love what a great place to take it back to say, well, hang on, what are we actually even talking about here? As you're talking about that, and I'm sure we've all been there, I used to work in big corporate, and it just reminds me, even how many of you out there would have agile transformations or digital transformations or something, right? And I kind of half joke that it's like it's agile with a capital A, because right, we're agile now, but it's on top of everything else is kind of the same. And it's just, you can't just say, right, we're transforming, or there are scars from corporate transformations, right? Because they do go on and they're expensive and really hard. I want to ask a bit more, well, not a bit more, we're talking about it anyway, but Shane, from you, like with your leadership hat on and your experience leading human beings, because I'd love to get a bit more into that, because the things that you're saying, I mean, it's simple to say, isn't it? Well, we just need to be looking in bite-sized chunks and getting into the psyche. Yes. But I think for a lot of our community, we all know here, it's not, leading other humans isn't easy, right? Like, it's challenging because we're leading ourselves, we're leading others. It's something we're adjusting and learning every single day. when you reflect, I guess, on your role, the CEO, it's all comes to you. You're, I'm sure, inspiring and bringing everyone along and readjusting and telling the story and all of that. So much to do this. I'd love to get a bit more into your reflections, your experience of what it takes to do that as a people leader.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects to that. I think LIXI is a much smaller organisation than the other organisations I've been involved in, and in many ways that makes it much more pleasurable to lead. I get to be involved with all of the people, and I do enjoy dealing with people and building relationships with the team and trying to mentor them. I remember a prior role at Barclays where I had a substantially larger team, and it becomes a lot harder to maintain all of those relationships to the level that I personally enjoy. But it's a really interesting, the idea of leading at something like a transformation where you're trying to influence the mindset of people. I've seen too often, particularly amongst technologists, if you've invested a lot in learning a particular tool set, you tend to look for ways to use that tool set to solve problems. It's the classic, if all you got's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think there's a lot of that goes on. So I think real leadership is, in this kind of context, is really finding ways to challenge the staff that need to be challenged, to try and reimagine the way that they operate within themselves to elicit the outcome they want. So in our everyday life, it really is about understanding what's the outcome you want, and it's not just doing the same things the same way you've done it before. What can you do to improve the way that you deliver that? But I mean, leadership is a whole other.
I was thinking this is another episode, but how isn't this kind of the point, which Jen, obviously I'll throw to you, but this is the point that we talk about all the time, is that you can't separate the two, right? Like anything that we talk about in the show, yes, it's deep tech and it's different skills and it's really interesting to get to the pointy end of specific things. But when we come down to it, like to your point, Shane, it's big, and people do spend lifetimes talking about great leadership and what it means. And I think, this is why we talk about this stuff, because it's important and it's challenging and it's always evolving. Jen, over to you. I'm doing mixed normal thing, logging the questions. So over to you.
That's quite okay. One of the things I just wanted to touch on was what you were just saying before, Shane, in terms of, when you're looking at digital transformation, and quite often it's happening up at this level without really looking further down, going that deep diving into the people that use it on a daily basis. It's all about, we were talking about it before, about the facade of it, but the underlying change really isn't there. Recently in the media, there's been a lot of conversation, particularly around the Big Four and what their digital transformation is now looking like. They're really investing in technology. You've got, CBA, who are completely customer first. That's their customer centric. That's what they do. And now we're finding that a lot of these bigger banks have got, the likes of, ANZX. They're actually separating, it's almost like their own innovation hubs. Do you think that they're listening to, I guess, what is actually taking place, that they can't afford to be doing that change at that level anymore? And that's why we're seeing this, I guess, this change within the industry of separating it for that sheer focus of delivering real transformation.
Yeah, or even buying in the case of an organisation. 86-400. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a, they're all hedging their bet either way. So the idea of bringing in a parallel, fully digitised stream is really attractive. If you can make that work and you can start shifting load over onto that new, whether it be ANZX or each of them have got their own initiative, essentially looking at doing it in that way. But then one thing I am seeing is they're still investing in sort of the home buying existing legacy stack at the same time as building out something new. So I hope that what they're trying to do is get learnings from each and apply them to the other. So there's certainly things that a stream like ANZX will be able to learn and deliver that had they tried to do it in the existing home buying stack, it would have been really hard. But it's entirely possible that having learnt it and delivered it in the ANZ stack, in the digital stack, they'll be able to transition that across into the home buying stack. So I don't think it's an all or nothing. I think there'll be a lot of trying and seeing. And at the end of the day, a lot of the agility that people are talking about as a desired attribute is about trying something, learning, failing fast, applying the learnings across the broader organisation. So I don't think it's an all or nothing in that new digital stream of work.
Just one more thing.
Go for it.
Along those lines, that's the only reason I'm doing this is, because like you were just saying, all or nothing, not necessarily, but a combined approach with, the learnings. Because the other thing that, we're noticing is that alignment now to less larger scale transformation programs, like what you were alluding to before. We're no longer looking, or the industry is no longer sort of going, oh yeah, that's a 2 to 3 year project where we're getting in on that. They're looking for short, sharp, and I think this touches on what you were saying before in terms of being able to deliver, learn, adjust, move forward. We're seeing a lot more of that as well. So from your aspect, from your perspective, you're obviously in a lot of these digital transformation programs, and you're seeing it right across the industry. Are you noticing that same thing inside where it's shorter, sharper? That's what everyone's sort of looking for at the moment.
Yeah, I think the challenge for me that I see in those organisations is still the mechanisms for prioritising work and planning projects is still quite difficult in that the pipelines tend to be fairly long. You've got budgeting cycles across a year, and you've got certain capacity to slide work around, but regulatory requirements sometimes come up at the drop of a hat. Yeah. And there is a tendency to continue to prioritise first anything regulatory, second anything that's really visible. So again, it's the digital features. We just need this e-signing in place because people can't come into the branch to sign, or electronically verify income, etc. Those kind of things that are really attractive. But under the hood, the idea of digitising a requirements gathering and transmission process to a series of developers and testers and the automation of a testing process just isn't glamorous. But that's the kind of work that in the absence of executing that, the next project next year is going to be just as painful as the one that you did this year. But if you can get that... I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one.
Sorry, I was just saying, God, but that's what happens. Like, we know that. You're saying that. I'm going, yes, but inevitably, sorry, I interrupted you because I was violently.
That's okay. But you do see that these projects that just aren't glamorous continue to get resources stripped away to work on the regulatory requirement that's just come in, or the more glamour project. So the real root cause of inability to change often isn't getting fixed at the rate that it needs to be able to execute change tomorrow. Again,
I mean, this is a whole other series just by itself, Jen, is what I'm thinking as we're talking this. But so no pressure, Shane, because it's not like we're expecting you to come up with the answer, but it's so interesting because how do you, and I'm thinking, having kind of, that's why I'm nodding going, it's so hard when you're a leader of teams, CEO down, exec teams, leaders in the business. I'm sure our community are listening to you going, yep, completely resonate, completely get it. And then there's this but, and the but's going to be, but what do we do when the regulators tell us to do X? What do we do when, our business customers from a lending perspective can't come in and we don't have DocuSign? And again, I'm not looking like there's no one answer, but again, your perspective is really interesting on this because I think it's probably to the point that as leaders and business, it's always a trade-off, it's a readjustment, it's small things. But Like, how when you're in that, do you reckon you start to prioritise that so you don't fall into this trap of the glamour and the reg, and then we do the same thing over and over again?
Yeah, and just keep using sticky tape and cable ties to patch it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It is really hard, I think, and I think that's where some of the digital transformation programs have been effective, in that it's really about making sure that the people at all levels have got the tools, and again, the processes, etc., to make sure that they have a little bit more authority and autonomy over their own destiny. Because if you get access to the people right at that coalface, they will often make decisions that make life better for them next week, next month, next year, rather than focusing on just the feature. And I think some of the frameworks that I've seen in the big digital transformations for enabling that have been successful, but the results tend not to be, again, you fix a bit of automation through your software delivery lifecycle. It's not that glamorous, so it doesn't make it in the media. But if you successfully roll out the e-signing, it's kind of a big thing. So I think it's really about enabling people throughout the organisation to have that authority and autonomy over the way that they do things. And again, it's also about executing change regularly. Anytime I see an organisation that says, we've got to slow down the frequency of our releases and make them bigger so that we disrupt less along the way, I shudder at that idea, because inevitably a consequence of executing change less frequently is you're doing it less, you get less good at it. If you wanted to encourage a kid to be good at cricket, you'd say get down to the nets 2 or 3 times a week. You got to be doing it all the time. If you want to get good at change, you don't say, hold on, we're only going to do it every quarter. You need to get practiced at delivering change. You need to do it regularly. And even if it's something that doesn't seem to deliver a business outcome today, if you're automating a process at a very granular level, and so that sort of plants a seed of the right behaviour, and that can then grow and spread throughout the organisation. But it's around finding the frameworks at a senior level, at an executive level, to come back in at the coalface and enable that. That's the challenge, I think.
I think that also touches on what you were saying before in terms of the people aspect. And Alex, we talk about this all the time in terms of you can't separate the technology and the people. They both feed into one another. And what you were saying before in terms of having those transformation programs limited to up here without really deep diving, it's the people aspect at that level who can add the value to doing that. Now, when we talk about leadership, when we talk about the human element of these digital transformations, I think, and look, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I'm picking up from the conversation is probably one of the biggest obstacles for digital proper change within digital transformation is that people aspect, having that lack of understanding of the value of the different levels within the organisation. Like you were saying, smaller incremental changes at a deeper level can actually help build it up over time. Would you agree that that it's not necessarily always the technology side that is actually that inhibitor? It's more either the leadership or management.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've just come from a presentation where some of the conversation ended up being around that idea of the successful implementation of change. If you're implementing technology, it's actually requiring a reset of the way that the process is executed. Processes evolve over many, many years, and you'll often end up with something being done because Dave, who used to work here, said that's what we had to do. And you just keep doing it that way because that's the way you were taught to do it. But often nobody necessarily sees the overall purpose of what what the entire process is for. So sometimes a digital transformation or a big project gives you an opportunity to reset, and it's not about the digitization or the technology as such. It's just re-looking at the process and the people involved and going, are we doing it the best way before we worry about the technology? So yeah, absolutely.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I love also, I'm listening to what you're saying and sort of to put my words on yours, but I'm also hearing a lot about personal agency, which again, Jen knows we're excited about this because we're doing a lot in this space at the moment. And there's so much to this, because I think, you saying before, I think you were saying, your people, if you can give them more authority and autonomy over the way they do things, over their own destiny, like this is part of it, isn't it? Because it is giving people those tools. And I was thinking about what you said before about, I think it was an example about, whether it's highly skilled, highly technical, for example, technologists. And I think your words were something along the lines, Shane, of, when you've got the skill set, or you've got a mindset and you've got this tool set, that's what you use to solve the problem, because that's what we do as humans. That's my known. And it's fascinating to me, because I think, unsurprisingly, we're talking a lot about diversity. We talk a lot about inclusion. We talk a lot about change, and here we are talking about change. It's through a different lens, but I think the same holds true, right? Like human beings, how do we recognise and become more aware of kind of the limitations in our thinking, our own personal agency, those things where we have to show up in a different way, and then that sort of has a ripple effect. But it takes time, right? Like it's big.
Yeah, it does. And I think back to my time as a developer, and I remember being on teams where everyone just kind of agreed with everyone else, and there wasn't any particular argument or discussion. And I think the outcomes were much less successful in those teams where we had people that would adamantly argue for a point of view, and they might be extreme, but the argument, that conflict in and of itself and the different points of view, etc., ended up meaning we had a much better product at the end than if everyone just went along happily going, yeah. So I think that the diversity and the diversity of experience, diversity of opinion is incredibly important.
And it takes a lot, doesn't it? I mean, we all know, and again, I think this is the nuance of being a leader, like to actually make others feel safe to challenge you. And I'm sure, I mean, this is a big part of your job, right? Like the CEO, like making others feel, have safe space to actually challenge you and say, well, I'm not really sure, and then get to that conclusion. I mean, that is so important, and it takes a lot. I'd love, and I said to you, we're going to run out of time fast. It's like a time vortex here. But yeah, I'd love any of your thoughts around just making that cultural environment space. And also, we haven't really touched on, you've worked overseas in different countries as well, and I'd love to kind of tap into a bit of, what did you learn from those different experiences, different ways of doing business, like whatever comes. But I think that would be fascinating for our audience as well, because there's a lot to be said around diversity of experience that you would have experienced just from those sort of things.
Yeah, and I think the diversity and having people challenge you is interesting, because there's a lot of cultural aspects to it as well. So there are, particularly when I've worked moved from London to Singapore and dealt with a lot of developers from all over the world, really. There are nuances of cultures that mean you need to ask questions in slightly different ways, or validate the understanding that's taken place when you have a conversation. And it's complicated. It can be very, very local nuances as well. It's not just, you can't generalize. So at the end of the day, you need to, I think, become fairly good at understanding people and understanding motivations, etc. Because if you can't do that at an individual level, it does make it really hard. But I certainly don't profess to be an expert at that. I just recognise that there are challenges associated with it. It is really interesting.
Jen, go.
No, I was just going to say, when you were talking about the relationship that you actually have to have, and to really extract the best out of your team. One of the things that people keep talking about, particularly with what we've all gone through, over the last sort of 12 months is that mindset for, you know, some of our leaders to have to shift to a way more of an empathetic mindset in terms of how they deal with their, you know, with their teams to become more relatable, to extract that level of information. I mean, so many of us, you know, a lot of us still working from home, you know, slowly transitioning back into office environment, and it's made a massive change. You know, productivity on the most, you know, from what I'm hearing in the industry, productivity hasn't changed. In fact, in some ways it's increased within, you know, certain job roles and descriptions, but it's now that social aspect as well in terms of, you know, it's a cultural thing internally within an organization to be able to create an environment where people feel comfortable to challenge ideas. You know, I think now that everyone's, you know, sort of had so much isolation in a lot of ways, is really bringing that back in, because, you know, people, you know, I remember at the start of all of this, everyone, cameras are on. Now there's a little bit of fatigue, cameras are off, a lot of things. So getting that, you know, those relationships built again to really extract, you know, what you need out of a team. You know, have you had any problems with that or issues with that, or are you finding that there was a shift that had to be made over the last 12 months in terms of what you, obviously your experience overseas and then having to go through a pandemic like this?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, hasn't it? Because I think in the first weeks where everyone was frantically making sure that you just had the tools to do your job for the next week at home, and the idea was we'd be back as soon as we possibly could. And in going through that, we've, I think, realised that lots of other benefits to the flexibility that working from home brings. The engagement with family and the flexibility to work at different periods of the day, not necessarily exactly the 9 to 5, has been really interesting. And as you say, I don't think productivity's dropped particularly. So it's interesting to see. I've seen some surveys where senior executives are expecting the workforce to be back in a year or so, maybe 80%, maybe not fully, but 80%. But these are often the same organisations that are trying to encourage digital natives to be the people working in their organisation. Now, the digital natives are the ones that are perfectly happy being at home forever. I think there's just going to be a cohort of people that are probably more uncomfortable with the working from home, particularly when we were so used to our work environment providing social interaction and the social network that we operated within. Now you just, because you live all over the city, you can't go for a Friday afternoon catch up with the people that you work with. So you need to rely on a different network for that aspect of your life. And I think it'll mean we'll end up much more balanced. But it is hard for people that, I think particularly graduates are the ones that I feel that for the most. My experience as a graduate was just awesome, coming into the office and you're hanging out with a whole bunch of people, you're observing people, some of them are mentors, they're not necessarily, you're just observing the behaviour of everyone in the organisation. That's out the window. But for those a little bit further along in their career path, I think it's probably much easier being more remote. So I think it's just different challenges for different cohorts of people and different organisations that want to enable the behaviour in different ways. It'll be a really interesting few years watching how this evolves.
And I think this is kind of the point, isn't it? Which, I mean, I love listening to you talk about this, because I think the fact is we don't know, and there's not one box. And it's interesting because just on this topic, and there's so much to this, you know, and I'm sure you're the same, as you said, you know, I've spoken to loads of leaders who are like, well, we've never been here before. So we're feeling our way. And I guess to your earlier points, we're testing and learning. Does this work? Does this work for this particular group? Is it, you know, we do it in shifts? Do we but their whole attitude is we don't know. We're kind of embarking on new territory, but we're never going back to kind of the box that we came from. And then I speak to others that are like, no, soon we'll get everyone back in the office and it'll be back to how it was. And I just don't think that is ever happening. Like, we're never going back to that, and it'll be some kind of combo. But I think to your point as well, Shane, which is really interesting, is I was speaking to feel like I'm so old when I say I was speaking to a young person the other day. Anyway, what happened? But I was speaking to someone, incredibly talented person who's just joining our team, probably in their early 20s, and she was saying, my reflection on everything that COVID and the pandemic is, she said, my kind of tolerance for what happens in workplaces and ways of working has changed. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Like, what do you mean when you say that? And she was reflecting pretty much on what you were saying around the digital native. She's like, well, if someone said to me that, I have to go into an office and it's very rigid and kind of the old way, I kind of go, well, no, it doesn't. Like, people, just talented people, like always, are not buying that anymore. So I think it's a journey that we're all on, isn't it, about around all this. So interesting.
Yeah, and then you layer on the complexity of occupational health and safety, and contracts, and wow, it's hard.
Yeah. There's a lot to this, and we so appreciate you chatting with us. So we said before, this does go super fast, so we've got a few minutes left. So I'm sure Jen and I we're going to pepper you with a couple of questions.
All right.
But
bring it on.
Well, and we've covered some of this during the chat, and like we've said to you before, our audience, it's funny, people get so much from just the human journey and your perspective. And you said something before that sparked a question I want to ask you about. So you made such a great point about, especially when you're starting out on your career, you took for granted showing up in an office and role model. You were talking about mentors and role models. I get to observe, I see people, I learn through great role models and peers and that kind of environment. In your career, is there someone that you reflect back on, or even now as well, a great mentor, or just someone that's, kind of been a really defining influence in direction, confidence, career, anything? Like, just has there been someone like that for you?
I don't think there's anyone specific. I've always been a people watcher. So being in an office is really interesting, in being able to watch behaviour and responses to behaviour and the kinds of behaviour that elicit the right outcomes. I think there's a lot of, I've actually learned a lot from, negative role models, seeing the way things shouldn't work. And a whole collection, a huge collection of people that I've worked with over the years that I've learned a lot from, both positively and behaviours not to replicate. But no, not one in particular that I would point out.
Yeah, well, in that case, I'm going to follow on with that theme then and say, what piece of advice have you received from somebody over the course of your career that you still carry with you today?
Yeah, I think just trying to be authentic is really important. Whilst you want to elicit a particular outcome or a particular behaviour, it's important that you do it in a way that's sort of true to yourself, so that you are being who you are, being authentic. I think people respond to that really well, and that's important.
And I love that you say that, and this is part of role modelling, because simply by you saying it, I mean, this is important, but sometimes it feels like it's hard to do, to show up as yourself, especially when you're younger and you're more stressed. I think you kind of get older and go, well, I don't care, this is me. So I think it takes some life wisdom to get confidence to do that, right? So it's great that you say that. Probably final question, and you might have given us clues along the way, because I also love that you're, there's a whole heap of people along the way that I've learned from, good and bad, and social learning theory, right? We learn from what we see, both negative and positive, and people. Where do you get your inspiration from? And it doesn't have to just be work. Are you a reader? Are you a podcast listener? Are you a runner and reflector? Like, is there a particular book or thing or something that you love to listen to or watch or read that you can share?
Yeah, I'm a tinkerer. I love technology, and I program a little bit all the time, and I do it fairly badly. I'm sure my team would say it's much better when you don't touch the code. But going back to the idea of once you've got a tool set, that's all you use. Technology is just leapfrogging over itself day in, day out. And whatever tools, frameworks, languages, etc., you were using 3 or 4 years ago, they're probably not the right tool for the job anymore. So if you're not staying on top of things, and I learn in a very hands-on way, so I do try and stay up to date with the latest tools and frameworks and have a go at a lot of them. Otherwise, I feel like, even as a leader, if you don't have some perception of what's going on, you can't ask the right questions of the teams that work for you.
So true. It's so true. And
back to the authentic thing. One thing that I did just on reflection think too, this little window that we've had into people's lives working from home, when people don't have the blurred background, of course, or the fake scene, it is really. I think it's been a little bit easier to see people's authentic selves because you suddenly brought into their whatever work room they're working in, and you do hear their dogs and you see the cats and children, and it's slightly different, isn't it?
It's become more human.
Yes, and I hope we don't lose that. I think it's everything we've talked about today. We're human beings. There's no perfect answer. There's no perfect science. It's that evolution, and I think, that's just another example. We were joking about dogs and cats just before we went live, but yeah, I hope that's what we don't lose. I hope we don't go back to trying to compartmentalise. But Shane, thank you so much. I feel like we could talk to you. We could, chew your ears off for at least another hour, but we'll let you go. But certainly from my perspective, thanks so much for joining us. Time out of your day. It's brilliant to chat to you about a whole wide range of things, and I'm sure our audience have certainly got loads from this.
No, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was good fun.
Oh, well, it's got to be fun. So, look, thank you. And Jen, thank you. Mick, sorry, I think I found another co-host. But so enjoyed co-hosting with you. Love doing this with the Sandstone team. So brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. As always, we never take it for granted. There's loads you can do with your lunchtime, and we love that you watch us and tune in from all over the world. So thank you, Shane. Thank you, Jen. And see you all soon for another, of course, amazing episode of Digital First, a Banking Transformation. See you all soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.